Welcome back to the Eric Krown Crypto channel. Wishing you a happy and healthy start to this nice Thursday morning here. It's the last Thursday of the year, baby, and very little's going on, but there is a few things to be preparing for probably within this next week span here. Ultimately, however, the big opportunities I do still stick with as in early January of 2023. So it's really all set up for that. Yes, there are probably a few things that are going to happen in the short-term timeframes in the interim. Wanted to follow up on, of course, yesterday's short-term timeframe analysis as well, as we were looking for first a downside move, kind of seeing a small amount of that, in this very contested $300 daily range. Absolutely insane. And so let's just jump right into it right here, right now. So first things first, I want to start off with this chart. This is the chart that is still giving me a bias towards a downside move first before any sort of a greater long-term bounce, probably long-term bounce within the context of Q1 of 2023. But in this case, we do see a volatility versus stochastic momentum signature right here. Volatility represented by the HVP of stochastic momentum, which my cursor is currently on right now. Anytime that it gets down to extreme lows, blah, 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 and that expands from those extreme lows, we've seen an average move of almost 40% over the course of an average about 3.5 weeks. And of course, I've taken a first standard deviation measurement of this and also noted that the direction of the stochastic oscillator has been correct in getting the direction of the volatility expansion 82% of the time, or 9 out of 11 of the past iterations, of which that's the full history of CME right there. It's not perfect. I mean, realistically, I want like 5 times that number, about 5 times that number, but it's the best that we can do with the data that we have, or the full data that we have. So in this case, why am I biased towards a downside move? Well, we can see very obviously that volatility is at extreme lows and probably going to start to curl up relatively soon here, maybe even on this next period after tonight, which actually closes tonight, I guess. and in this case, the 2-day time frame stochastic oscillator is going to very likely be positioned to the downside, assuming that Bitcoin today, upon closure on CME, is below 16,670, which right now it's more than $300 below, which usually not that big of a deal for Bitcoin in today's day and age. That's a fucking mile, or like a country mile, or whatever means a lot. I don't even know. But in this case, yes, that would be a cross to the downside, plus remaining within the bearish control zone. And, with this setup over here, I do think that that would be very, very likely good enough to retest somewhere reasonably close to the current lows. Yes, these stats would imply a new low. I'll explain why I think that that's incredibly unlikely later and why this is probably going to be an outlier. But yes, that would be within the realm of possibilities, I suppose. As a nearly 40% move to the downside off that last current high would put Bitcoin somewhere around like $12,000, I do believe. Yes, that will be relevant if Bitcoin does close a higher term time frame below the current lows at about $15,000 on CME. Until then, I still believe, it's not that I still believe, I still think what's most likely is that we'll get something like this, where Bitcoin probably does, probably comes down somewhere around the current lows, bounces up, blah, 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 and then sets up for a big bounce Q1 of 2023. I still think that Bitcoin very likely trades towards $20,000 before below 15 on a closing basis. We'll come back to that if and when it is relevant. Anyways, on to the next chart over here. I did want to follow up on this time frame, the 3-day time frame, which you did not talk about yesterday, but I did fail to mention that yes, it does have hidden bearish divergence. Also has a bit of a head and shoulders on 3-day RSI, and also back below the exponential, and also danced around the bearish control zone. Again, very likely good enough to get things back down around the current lows. In the short term, by the way, it doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't try for a short-term upside move, but ultimately, I do think that gets rejected. There's really no reason for me to invalidate these things, especially as long as Bitcoin's below about 17,200 on a closing basis. 2-day time frame also obviously has the same sort of setup over there as well. And what I'd like to now pivot into is the HPDR indicator. So this is one of the major reasons why I think it's unlikely that we'll see new closing lows for Bitcoin. And it is due to this. So when we're looking at this, we're basically just looking at the historical returns. And, well, what does that essentially mean? It essentially means it gives us a statistical way to be looking at what's the most likely thing to be happening granted Bitcoin's history. Now, in this case, you can see that the blue range, which represents the 50% of historical range returns, would give us a high where Bitcoin pretty much has its Q4, or I wouldn't say it's Q4 high, but it's high in the last couple of months here at 18,400. And the low over here, which would be about 15,800. Now, this is, again, going to be defined on a closing basis. If we were to go to CME, I believe it's probably a little bit lower. Indeed, it is. That'd be a little bit lower than 15,000 bucks. But ultimately somewhere around there, and keep in mind that there's, a greater discount on CME compared to spot price action, a little bit more than 200 bucks right now. So that also needs to be taken into consideration. But very, very likely that if Bitcoin were to come back down to this region, probably tries for a bounce there at minimum. And then we can analyze things after that. But personally speaking, I do think that it very likely holds, trade a little bit of sideways, and then probably bounce pretty heavily into Q1. Anyways, yes, okay, so we've gone through that. Also of note in the short-term timeframes, stochastic momentum continues to favor downside continuation here. 12-hour time frame shows incredibly low, not BBWP, although it is a volatility indicator, alongside 12-hour momentum remaining to the downside as long as Bitcoin, again, on CME is below about 16,500, which currently it's almost 200 bucks below as of right now. 6-hour time frame is going to also be downside pivoted as long as Bitcoin's below 16,475, again, about 150 bucks away from current price action. 4-hour time frame is also downside pivoted as long as Bitcoin's below 16,500 and volatility is starting to actually expand there. And the hourly is actually up right now as long as Bitcoin's above 16,300. So very, 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 very short term. We're talking like an hourly here. Just Bitcoin pop back up, maybe even fill somewhere around that that prior gap from yesterday. Yeah, possible. I mean, there's some bullish divergence on the hourly, so it's going to the fucking moon and beyond. But again, any bounce that essentially fails to get back above, let's call it like 17,100 is just that, a failed bounce before trying very likely lower in the current range. As far as the lights out line in the short term, I think that we've kind of already violated it. Yeah, a few, like a day and a half ago. Yeah, that was below about 16,550 on a closing basis. Obviously, that's already happened. So again, just kind of a continuation of this. I realize and I recognize that it's been rather boring, but and while the analysis has been more or less consistent, that's what it is a lot of the time. It's fucking boring. I mean, that's what it is to be a trader. It's mostly waiting. In fact, I can see that most people are bored out of this market, which is probably a good thing for both their and everyone else's soul. But I also see like people in the Discord like trying to trade this right now. I haven't made a trade in like a week or might even be 2 weeks going on here. Surely I assume that most people have noticed that, hey, we've been in an extremely tight range for weeks now where barely anything has actually fucking happens. There's just better things to be doing in these times. The last couple weeks of the year typically are extremely low volatility and typically do actually float up and to the right. Obviously, this is not going to be the case here, but ultimately, my point is, and what is typically very, very consistent, is that it's very boring. Most people take this time off. When I was actually trading in a more professional sense, most people didn't even show up to the floor for the last couple weeks of the year. January 2nd is when the real trading begins yet again. Anyways, we're 8.5 minutes into this bitch. I think I'll just briefly go over Ethereum as well. Why not? If Bitcoin does play out a move to the downside, what's the relevant region for Ethereum? Probably about 1,100, somewhere give or take a few bucks from that number. Again, back above the December highs, and I'd be looking for a pretty big rally, probably towards 17,000 to 1700 to 1800-ish region in Q1 of 2023. But for right now, short term, risk remains to the downside. My main message is that while risk remains to the downside, we probably get a test close to the current lows. I do think that very likely holds. One of the big reasons why I think that it will hold, amongst other things, mainly the HPDR statistical indicator right there, but would also be the global open interest. You can see that, we're not at lows, but we are witnessing levels of open interest, which represents leverage positions that really haven't seen since like 2020. So that was obviously, about 2 years ago now. And more importantly with that, that was when Bitcoin was trading, well within the 4 digits, around 8,000, 9,000 bucks. And so when you're looking at something like this, I do think that this market has been significantly and sufficiently deleveraged compared to what we would expect. And, while it could probably drop a little bit more, there's just not enough people to liquidate here to really get anything significantly new low, in my opinion. Again, next move very likely probably going to be a big one to the upside, and then we get to play the game of where does the next major high come in around. So, anyways, that's a good place for me to be leaving off on this particular video. If you're still here during these times, again, I ain't going nowhere. Well, at least I don't have any plans to go anywhere. I'll still be here because I don't have anything better to be doing with my life, and that's fine because we can all be doing nothing better together. And let's all do worse together. Yeah, that's a real nice fucking positive message to leave off on this day. But yes, in a more sincere tone, I would like to wish you the best as always. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully soon.